Hi there. It's me, Finn. And tonight, we're going to talk about something you might not have thought about before, or maybe you did, but only for a moment, before drifting away to other thoughts. You've heard of pirates, right? Blackbeard, Jack Sparrow, maybe Anne Bonny, maybe Grace O'Malley, if you're one of the lucky ones who went digging deeper. But, here's the question that might keep your thoughts sailing slowly tonight. What happened to female pirates after they were captured? I mean, did they walk the plank? Were they sent to prison? Were they treated the same way as men? Or maybe, just maybe, their story was a little quieter, hidden in the folds of forgotten letters and sleepy court records. Let's start.
But before we do, why not press that little subscribe button if you feel like it? No pressure. Okay, let's begin.
It's a warm afternoon somewhere off the coast of Jamaica, around the early 1700s. The wind is soft, barely moving the sails now. The deck is quiet, not from peace, no, but from the eerie calm that comes just after a fight. There's a ship floating there, not moving much anymore. Its sails are torn, like paper left too long in the rain. Its crew, captured, tied, beaten, maybe, exhausted, definitely. And among them, two women. One named Anne Bonny, the other, Mary Red. Have you heard of them before? Maybe just their names. But not what came next. Not what really happened. After. You see, back then most people didn't even believe women could be pirates. Too small, too gentle, too delicate, they said. So when a woman was caught, in trousers and a bandana, sword still warm from battle, people didn't know what to do. Were they women? Were they criminals? Were they pretending? Or were they just angry? Let's walk slowly now, into the world where these women lived. Not just the stormy sea, but the quiet corners where decisions were made about their lives. Let's begin with Anne. She was born in Ireland, but her father moved her to the Carolinas when she was just a girl. Charleston wasn't a pirate city, not really, but it was near pirate waters. And Anne, well, she didn't like being told what to do. She married a small-time pirate named James Bonny. But James, was boring. Anne wanted adventure, and one day she found it. With Calico Jack. Yes, that Calico Jack, the one with the bright coats and charming grin. He had a ship, he had a crew, and soon, he had Anne. She dressed as a man to join them. But some say she didn't have to pretend much. She was fierce, but also quiet when she needed to be. She listened, learned, watched. And then there was Mary. Oh, Mary's story is even sleepier in its strangeness. She was raised as a boy, not by choice, but by her mother. Why? Because the family had lost a son, and they wanted to keep getting money from a grandmother who didn't know the child had died. So, Mary became Mark. She lived like a boy, joined the military, and later found her way to the sea. Where did Anne meet Mary? On that ship. That one we talked about. Sails torn, floating, captured. They were both there, and when the Navy caught up to them, they were not spared. Captured, tied, put in chains, maybe. But what next? Here's where the story slows down. Into jail cells and courtrooms. Into cold stone and long sighs. Into things written in ink that's now faded. The two women were taken to Jamaica, to Spanish Town. Not a pretty place at that time. Hot, crowded, full of flies and noise. But the courtroom, quiet. Stone walls, wooden benches, two women standing in men's clothes. They were sentenced to death. Yes, death. Just like the men. No mercy, no different laws. But, here comes the quiet twist. Anne Bonny and Mary Read both said something in court. Something so soft, so strange, it paused the judge's pen. They both claimed to be pregnant. Now, whether it was true or not, no one's quite sure. But back then, the law had a rule. If a woman was pregnant, she couldn't be hanged until the child was born. So, their executions were delayed. Now this is where most stories end. But, you're still here, and there's more. Let's follow Mary first. She stayed in prison. Some say she gave birth, others say she didn't. But what we know is that she died, in jail, of a fever. That's it. No pirates came to save her. No dramatic escape. Just a quiet fever. And then nothing. But Anne, she didn't die in that prison. No one knows exactly what happened. Some say her wealthy father pulled strings. Some say she escaped. Others whisper she changed her name and started a new life somewhere, maybe in Virginia, maybe back in the Carolinas. But after her trial, her name disappears. Gone. Faded ink. Empty records. Just blank spaces where stories could have been. That's just one pair of female pirates. But they weren't the only ones. You see, most female pirates weren't famous. They didn't wear fancy coats or have flags with their initials. They were cooks, or lovers, or just tired women who wanted money. Some disguised as men. Some didn't bother. When they were caught, the punishments varied. Some were hanged. Some were sold into slavery. Others were simply released. Yes, released. Why? Because many courts didn't quite know how to treat them. Were they pirates? Were they women acting under a man's command? Were they even real? One French court case called a woman a decorative presence on the ship. She had lived on the sea for 5 years. Decorative. Others were kept in prison. Not forever, but long enough that no one cared anymore. And when they were released, they vanished. Some became wives. Others became cooks in port cities. A few, maybe, went back to sea, under new names, new clothes, new silences. So, what happened to female pirates after capture? Well, like letters that fell behind a drawer, never thrown away, just never found again. And maybe, just maybe, some of them preferred it that way. They had already tasted freedom. The salt air, the rocking hammocks, the stolen gold, the laughter at night, the silence before battle, the warmth of rum by firelight, the smell of sea and smoke and sugar. What came after was quieter. And sometimes, that quiet is the real treasure. So now you know that most of their stories simply fade away. No fireworks, no storms, just silence. But, if we look a little longer, into the dim corners of history, we'll find a few more shadows, a few more names. Ah, there's one. Her name was Rachel Wall. She was born in New Hampshire, and she didn't even set out to be a pirate at first. She was a servant. She was, well, quiet. Not in a sad way, just ordinary. But one day, while walking alone near the docks, a man came along and offered her kindness. His name was George Wall, and he wasn't quite as gentle as he first seemed. They married, and together, they turned toward the sea. They formed a small crew. Not a mighty ship like in the stories, just a modest vessel, pretending to be broken down. They'd float near the coast, looking like victims, and when another ship came near to help, they'd rob them. Again and again. Rachel wasn't just there. She was part of it. She lured people close with her soft voice. She helped with the gold. She knew the weight of ropes and sails, and when the law finally caught her, she didn't deny it. She was tried in Boston, in 1789, not hundreds of years ago, closer than most think. She was the last woman known to be executed for piracy in America. Yep, hanged. But what she said before her execution was even more surprising. She asked for forgiveness. And then she said something else. Softly, maybe through tears, maybe just with calm. She said she hoped God would take her home. Not quite the fierce pirate queen. People imagined just a tired woman at the end of a road she never meant to follow. Now let's drift across the sea, all the way to China. Yes, female pirates lived there too. One of them might just be the most powerful pirate who ever lived. Her name was Zheng Yi Sao, also known as Qing Shi. If Anne Bonny was a spark, Zheng Yi Sao was an ocean. And she commanded thousands of pirates. Not dozens, not hundreds, thousands. She married a pirate captain, but after he died, she took over, fully, confidently. And when she was threatened, she didn't run. She made deals. Clever deals. When the Chinese government sent warships after her, she fought them off. Again and again. Until they offered something strange. A deal. She could walk away. No charges. No death. No prison. But she had to give up the sea. And she did. She retired. Opened a gambling house. Raised her children. Lived to be 69. What happened to her after capture? Nothing. No prison. No punishment. Just quiet. A quiet end for a thunderous life. But that was rare. Most women never got such peace. Let's go back again, to the Caribbean. To another woman. Her name now mostly forgotten, but once written softly in a court journal. Sarah. Just Sarah. Just Sarah. She was caught aboard a pirate ship when it was seized. The record said, a woman found among the men. That's it. They didn't even mention what she looked like. Not her age. Not her crime. Just that she was there. What happened to her? The document ends. Her name never comes back. Some believe she was sent to a plantation, forced to work until her hands bled. Others say, maybe she convinced someone to let her go. A whisper in a hallway, a kindness from a tired judge. We'll never know. Many of the women weren't even given trials. If they weren't seen as dangerous, they were labeled as camp followers, or passengers. Put into prisons for a little while, then released into a city that didn't want them. No money, no name, just out. What did they do next? We imagine, maybe they worked in taverns, or washed clothes, or maybe, just maybe, they waited for another ship to come in, one that would take them far away again. Some did find work, some married, some died alone. Quiet ends, no storms, just, like a candle, quietly going out. There's something else, something almost tender, in some of the old letters and diaries. One naval officer, in 1718, wrote in a letter to his wife, "We have taken a vessel with strange folk, a woman among them, dressed like a man. She spoke little. She asked for nothing. He didn't even say what they did with her, just moved on." You won't find that letter in a textbook, but it's real, and it shows something. Most of the time, the world simply didn't know what to do with female pirates. They weren't expected. They weren't understood. And so, they were erased. Not loudly, not violently, just softly, like waves smoothing over footprints on sand. Let's pause for a moment, and imagine one of them. Maybe Anne, years later, in a cottage, inland. She's older now. No sword, no gold, maybe a cat. The wind is blowing gently outside. She's stirring a pot. The fire is small. She hums something, a tune she heard on a ship long ago. No one in the village knows, or if they do, they don't say. That's how many of their stories ended. Not in chains, not in books, just in kitchens, in gardens, in slow days, with memories no one asked to hear. And maybe that's the kind of ending they wanted. After all, the sea is beautiful, but also loud, always moving, never resting. And perhaps, just perhaps, these women wanted to rest. But still, every now and then, someone finds a whisper. A ring with a carved anchor, in an old drawer, a knife under a floorboard, a tattoo on a grandmother's arm. And maybe, just maybe, that quiet woman in your family tree was once a pirate. If you listen closely, you might hear her in your dreams. Not shouting, not fighting, just laughing softly, while the ship rocks gently beneath the stars. And that is how the story goes. Not in cannon fire, but in footnotes. Not in treasure maps, but in quiet sighs. Not in legends, but in sleep. Have you ever stood near an old harbor, in the very early morning, before the fishmongers wake, before the boots hit the wood, and just listened? It's almost like the sea remembers things we've forgotten. Old ships, old names, and women no one wrote down. Let's wander a bit farther from the names we do know. Anne, Mary, Rachel. Tonight, we look for the ones whose names never made it into books. Just soft mentions, in the corners of records, in the margins of logs. Sometimes, not even that. One of them, we only know from a shipping manifest. No full name, only Margaret, woman aboard the Sea Willow, captured June 1705. That's it. No trial, no notes, no sentence. Some say Margaret was a cook. Some say she took over the wheel when the captain fell. And others believe, that she was the captain. But it doesn't really matter what we think. The sea doesn't care. What happened after she was captured? One rumor says she was sold to a merchant. Not as a slave, but as a contracted domestic. Which is, just a softer word for unpaid servant. She worked in a house in Barbados, peeling fruit, washing sheets, sweeping floors. She never touched a ship again. Now imagine that. You've felt the waves beneath your feet. You've shouted into storms. You've laughed under stars. And then, you're indoors, in silence, scrubbing things. No voice, no sails, no wind, just the echo of who you once were. It makes you wonder how she slept at night. Did she dream of the sea? Or did she try to forget it? Did the salt still cling to her skin, long after the sea was gone? Let's move on now. There's another woman. This one, we only know from a church record in Antigua. It says, married, Elizabeth H., age unknown, formerly a prisoner from the Spanish coast. Some historians believe she had once sailed with a small crew of raiders. Not full pirates, just hungry men, and one woman. She was captured with them in 1713, released without a trial. And then, married a dock worker, had 3 children. One died in infancy, the others unknown. And it makes you pause, to think how many pirates, real pirates, became mothers. Not in legend, not in stories, just in real quiet life. Did they tell bedtime tales to their children? Did they say, "When I was young, I stood on the bow of a stolen ship"? Or did they say nothing? Some stories are too heavy to carry into the next life. There's another case, that makes you tilt your head and wonder. A woman named Isabella, captured off the coast of Morocco. She claimed she had been taken against her will by pirates, forced to dress like a man, forced to clean the decks. But, she knew how to tie sails. She knew the secret signals between ships. And when questioned, she gave the names of every crew member. In order, even the ones who died. Too many details for a passenger. The court let her go anyway. No charges, no notes. She disappeared into the fog. One small line in a port journal reads, "Isabella seen boarding a Dutch vessel. Destination unknown." And that was it. She might have gone north. She might have gone east. She might have become the captain of that ship herself. Or maybe, she married a baker in Amsterdam. No one knows, and that's what makes her story so sleepy. A mystery without sharp edges. Just possibilities. Let's slow down for a moment, and walk gently, into the darker places. There were prisons, cold ones, stone ones, caves carved into cliffs, cells with bars not quite straight. Women, especially those caught with weapons, were sometimes thrown into those places for years. One letter from a soldier at Port Royal says, 2 women kept in the west cell. One cries often, the other prays. We don't know who they were. No names, no trials recorded, just that they were there. And then not. But even in the dark, people found ways to keep pieces of themselves. One woman scratched a tiny drawing into the wall beside her sleeping spot. A ship, 3 sails, a bird above it. Someone traced it later, and said the sails looked almost perfect, drawn by someone who knew them. That's how we know she wasn't just imagining. She'd seen it. She'd lived it, even if no one ever asked for her story. And now, we turn slowly, to the letters. Not official ones, personal ones. There are scraps of parchment, tucked inside old trunks, sometimes used as bookmarks, that speak gently of women who once sailed. One man wrote, "I met a woman in Martinique, who could throw a knife better than any sailor I've known. She had eyes like the deep. She sold me rum and said she once slept in the captain's cabin. I didn't ask questions." Another, "My grandmother wore a ring shaped like a ship's wheel. She never said why." These aren't facts, but they're, soft truths. The kind of truths that don't need proof. They just settle into your mind like warm mist. So what happened to female pirates after capture? Some were punished. Some were forgotten. Some were set free, and chose not to return. But all of them, every single one, carried their stories like quiet treasure. And the world never quite knew what to do with that. The sea knew, but the world didn't. And maybe that's why their stories feel so peaceful now. Not loud, not famous, just floating there, like bottles with letters inside, waiting to be found, or not. Either way, they drift on. Have you ever noticed how after something big ends, like a long journey, or a loud celebration, the world feels oddly still? That's the feeling many female pirates must have known. After the capture, after the cells, after the trials, or lack of them, they didn't return to battle. There was no fanfare, just quiet. And tonight, we visit that space. Not the ship, not the courtroom, but the quiet years that followed. Let's go now, to a small house near a muddy river, in the colony of Georgia. The year is, perhaps 1729. A woman named Joanna lives there. She rises before the sun. She makes porridge, feeds the chickens, washes her only dress in a bucket of water drawn from a nearby well. No one in town really speaks to her. They say she came from the islands, that she once had gold teeth, but now they're gone. Every Sunday, she sits in the back pew of a small wooden church, and sometimes, just for a moment, she hums a sea shanty under her breath. Joanna had once sailed with smugglers, not real pirates perhaps, but close enough. She carried supplies between islands, traded sugar for rum, sailed fast through dark nights, laughed with men who called her Joe. She was caught by the British Navy and quietly released. No trial, no charges. Just a sentence spoken by an officer who didn't care. Get off the island and don't come back. And now, she lives here, by the river, feeding chickens, sleeping early, dreaming sometimes, of stars reflected on black water, nothing more. Further north, a woman called Nan is working in a bakery. Her arms are strong, covered in small burns from the oven. She doesn't speak much, but the children in the village like her. They say she tells stories when no one's listening, soft ones, strange ones, about silver coins buried beneath mango trees, and parrots who remember people's names, and a sea that never ends. Some say she was once part of a pirate crew. Others say she's just a woman with stories. Either way, she bakes quietly, sprinkles sugar, folds dough, rubs flour from her eyes. That's how most of the women lived after. Not with swords, not with ships, but with hands that remembered how to tie knots, and minds that couldn't forget the sea. There's something you might find strange. Many of the women, after capture, became healers. Yes, herbalists, midwives, quiet medicine makers. Maybe because they had learned herbs on the islands. Maybe because they'd seen wounds too often. Or maybe because they just wanted to help. One record in Jamaica notes, an older woman, known to have once sailed with pirates, now tends to births and fevers. The children call her Granny Salt. Granny Salt. It makes you smile, doesn't it? You can almost picture her, bent back, long fingers, a pouch of dried leaves, a laugh like wind over rope. She would have never been welcome in the governor's house, but among the poor, she was gold. Let's walk slowly now, into a market square. St. Kitts. A woman sits beneath a faded canopy, selling dried fruit and odd trinkets. A broken compass, a piece of amber, a small rusty coin with strange markings. No one asks where she got them, but children whisper that she once rode the waves with a red flag on her back, that she speaks to birds in Spanish, that she can still tie knots with her toes. She never confirms it, she never denies it, she just smiles. And when the sun gets too hot, she closes shop and disappears until next week. Come whiter were the ones who changed their names, started over. A woman who once called herself Clara, now went by Ruth. She worked in a boarding house near Charleston, made beds, dusted shelves, poured tea. She had a tattoo on her shoulder, faded now. Most people thought it was just a flower, but if you looked closely, it was a ship. 3 sails, 1 crow perched on the mast. No one ever asked about it. She liked it that way. Some female pirates wrote letters that no one read until centuries later. One short note found in the lining of a chest reads, "I saw the moon over Cuba from the crow's nest. I remember it. I wish someone else did too." No name, no date, just a memory, stitched into wood and time. And you begin to realize that after the capture, after the trials, the real life began. Not the loud one, not the thrilling one, but the one with long walks, soft chairs, the occasional storm, but mostly, quiet rain. And maybe that's what they wanted. They had already heard too much shouting, felt too much fear, smelled too much blood, so they learned to love quiet things. Tea, wool, birdsong, the sound of bread rising, the warmth of dogs. But don't mistake the quiet for sadness. There's something, powerful in choosing silence, in knowing you've seen the edge of the world, and choosing to sit in a rocking chair instead. Not because you lost, but because you're tired of winning. And maybe, just maybe, you prefer listening to the rain now, over the sound of cannons. You prefer the smell of bread, over salt and gunpowder. You prefer your name whispered at dusk, instead of shouted over crashing waves. So what happened to female pirates after capture? They lived, not always happily, not always safely, but they lived in corners and kitchens, with candles and cats, in soft clothes, under quiet skies. And maybe they didn't tell their stories, because they didn't need to. The sea remembers them, and that was enough. Somewhere, someone's great-grandmother was one of them. Someone's neighbor, someone's forgotten aunt, who always stared a little too long at the ocean. They didn't disappear, they just became calm. And in that calm, there's a kind of truth that doesn't need proving. It just is. Like the tide. Soft, still, endless. You're still here. That's nice. You're listening. And that means, somewhere, deep in your thoughts, you're still sailing. even if you're lying in bed, even if it's raining outside, even if your eyes are starting to flutter just a little. The story hasn't ended yet, and neither have the women in it. You know, memories are funny. Sometimes, the past doesn't leave through the front door. It just settles quietly inside small things. A folded shirt that smells like salt, a wooden spoon worn down at the edge, a habit of waking at dawn, even years after you stopped sailing. That's what happened to many of the women after they were captured. They didn't just forget. They didn't become someone else entirely. They simply softened. But the sea was still there, inside them, like when someone walks with a limp long after the wound has healed. The memory remains. Let's visit one of them now. Her name was Catherine. After her ship was seized, she was sent to work in a small fishing village in Newfoundland. Cold place, gray skies, quiet people. She worked in a fish smokehouse. The kind of place where the air always smells of salt and ash. Where everything moves slowly. Where no one talks much because they're all used to the wind doing most of the talking. Catherine had once commanded 3 men aboard a schooner. She wasn't the captain, officially. But the captain trusted her. And the crew did what she said. Now she spent her days laying fish flat over wooden racks, wiping her hands on her apron, sharpening knives, stillness all around. But if you looked closely, her hands still moved like a sailor, quick, efficient, never wasting motion. And when storms rolled in, she stood outside, not afraid, just remembering. One day, a child in the village asked her, "Were you ever a pirate?" She looked down at her shoes, rubbed her thumb across the edge of her apron, and said, quietly, "No, sweet one. I was just passing through. That was all." There was another woman, named Helene. She ran a small dye shop in a coastal town in southern France. Indigo, woad, turmeric. She dyed cloths and scarves, quietly and beautifully. People said she used salt water in her mixes, said her blues were deeper than the ocean, that they shimmered like waves. No one asked why she kept a broken compass on her shelf, or why she always stirred her vats in a figure-8 pattern, or why her sleeves were always rolled just like a sailor's. She didn't speak of it. But sometimes, when she leaned over her mixing pots, she hummed a tune no one could name. A slow sea song, probably learned from men with chipped teeth and sunburned shoulders. And the townspeople, they let her be. They liked her colors. They liked her quiet. And they figured, some things don't need explaining. You see, for many women, capture wasn't an ending. It was just a new current. A slower one. And in that current, they kept their own rhythm. Even if no one noticed, like the woman in Portobello, who always checked the sky before hanging her laundry. Not for rain, but for wind. She'd lived on a schooner for 8 years. Now she was a washerwoman. But she still tied knots the way you do on a sail. Still tucked her hair with 3 twists and a pin. Still squinted at the horizon, as if expecting sails to rise. She never told her story. Not once. But everyone around her knew. In the way you know when someone's been farther than you have. Now let's go inside a small tavern. Nothing special. Just a place with low ceilings and a fireplace that doesn't draw smoke properly. Behind the bar is a woman named Delia. She's older now, hair graying, hands knotted at the joints. She's polite, never smiles too big, but always gives you the right amount of drink. No more, no less. Above the bar is an old map, corners curled, marked with ink and red thread. No one asks where it came from, but some guess. Delia once sailed with her brothers, ran messages between pirate crews in the Spanish Main. She never stole gold. She never swung a sword. But she knew secrets, and she kept them. When she was captured, they didn't even realize she'd been involved. She walked away while others were shackled. Now, she serves rum in a crooked building. And once a year on a quiet night she lights a lantern on the windowsill, and leaves it burning until dawn. For someone, or no one. No one knows. It's in these little rituals that pirate life continued. Not in treasure, not in flags, but in the way a woman cuts bread, or stacks her coins, or stares too long at the stars. You can take a woman off the ship, but sometimes, the ship never leaves her. And isn't that a soft kind of defiance? Not loud, not sharp, just quiet persistence. And so, long after the capture, long after the sea was gone, many of these women became experts in silence. Not out of fear, but out of peace, because the loud days were over, and the quiet ones had their own kind of depth. Like a tide you can't hear, but feel. Like an anchor beneath still water. So again we ask, what happened to female pirates after capture? They became stories. Soft ones, unwritten, lived not told. And even now, their fingerprints remain on the backs of doorknobs, on the handles of mugs, on the knots of old shawls. In lullabies, no one remembers writing. They are still here, in the hush, in the calm, and tonight, they're keeping you company. Just like they did for each other, in small rooms, under quiet stars. Sleep easy, sailor. They would have liked you. You know, objects have a strange way of holding memory. Not loud ones. Not the kind of memories that jump out and wave their arms. But the quiet kind. Like whispers stuck in wood grain, or the smell of rope baked into old fabric. And when female pirates were captured, they often lost their freedom. But not everything. Some things, they kept. A spoon, a shell, a button from a stolen jacket, a gold earring with one stone missing, a folded piece of canvas, with a map drawn in charcoal on the back. And those small things, they held everything. Let's begin tonight's quiet walk. In a dusty little village near Havana. There's a woman who lives alone. Her name, they say, is only Maria. No one knows her age. No one knows where she came from. But she has a necklace, a strange one. It's made of tiny glass beads, and one shark tooth. The tooth is old, polished smooth from wear, and when children ask about it, she just smiles and says, "It came from the deep." Some say she was caught on a merchant vessel, headed toward the Yucatan coast. Some say she once slit a man's throat in silence, and was never caught. But none of that really matters now. She grows herbs. She reads palms. She always leaves one place setting empty at dinner. And the necklace, she never takes it off. Even in sleep. Across the sea, in a farmhouse in Ireland, a woman named Mags keeps a wooden box beneath her bed. It's worn. The corner's chipped. The lock is broken. Inside it, one compass. Still spinning. A red ribbon. A set of coins. Not worth much, but strange in shape. And one torn piece of a sail, stitched with a name. El León Azul. She used to sail on that ship. Not as a captain. Not even as part of the core crew. She was a night lookout. Sat in the crow's nest with a blanket and a spyglass. Kept her eyes open when everyone else slept. When the ship was taken, she jumped overboard. Swam ashore in the dark. And never spoke of it again. Now, she tends sheep. Wears quiet shoes. But every full moon, she takes out the box. Sits by the window. And holds the ribbon between her fingers. That's all. Sometimes a story doesn't need words. Just presence. Just texture. Just wait. Then there's the story of Isabel. She kept a spoon, that's all. Just a spoon, but not a normal one. The handle was curved slightly. Too thin. Like it had been worn down by 100 hands. And etched into the back, with a shaky hand and a sharp nail, was the word free. No one knows where she got it, but she always ate with it. Even when offered newer ones, cleaner ones, shiny ones. She always reached for her spoon, held it close, never explained it. Even on her last day, she held it in her hand. And when she passed, no one took it. They buried it with her. Objects don't speak, but they echo. Like the woman in a small village in the Bahamas, who wore a red scarf every day. Not around her neck, not in her hair, but tied to her wrist. Some thought it was fashion. Some thought it was superstition. But in truth, that scarf once hung on a mast. A signal, a mark, a warning, and she never let it go. It reminded her, not of danger, not of fear, but of freedom, and nights when the stars felt closer than land. One letter, found decades later in a ship captain's trunk, describes a woman in blue, with an earring made from a whale's tooth. She sold dried fish by the shore, never spoke above a whisper, but her eyes, they had that look, like they'd once seen fire on the horizon, and didn't flinch. Her earring was heavy, always tilted her head slightly, but she wore it, every day, until the end. Some women kept maps, but not maps like you'd think, not scrolls, not treasure routes, just tiny personal things. One woman stitched hers into the lining of her apron. It showed 3 islands, one with a dot, no names, no compass rose, no scale, but she knew what it meant. Another hid hers under a floorboard, drawn on parchment made from pressed leaves, only visible when held against the sun. And one woman drew hers in her mind. Every day, she would sit with her tea, and trace invisible lines on the table with her finger. Past Jamaica, around Tortuga, back to the cove near Nassau. She never said a word, but anyone watching her would know she was somewhere else. Somewhere, still on the sea. You see, capture can take your ship, your crew, your name, but sometimes, it can't take your anchor. And these women kept theirs, in thread, in metal, in habits, in silence. The world moved on. They didn't ask for fame, or justice, or recognition. Just a quiet place to keep their memory. And objects are perfect for that. They don't shout, they don't forget, they just stay, until someone notices. In a tiny shop in Port Royal, an old mirror was once sold. Behind the glass, etched so lightly it was almost invisible, was a ship, with a woman standing at the bow. No name, no signature, but someone made it. Someone who remembered. Maybe it was a gift. Maybe a goodbye. Maybe both. These things are everywhere. Tucked in trunks, hidden in toolboxes, worn smooth by time, but still, there. A woman who once commanded wind and tide, now keeping sugar in a jar that once held stolen pearls. A woman who sailed through monsoons, now mending curtains with thread made from sailcloth. The past doesn't vanish. It just reshapes, like waves smoothing stone. And maybe, just maybe, you've seen one of those objects. In an antique store. In a forgotten drawer. At the bottom of a box in someone's attic. You didn't know what it was. But now, you wonder. Maybe that ring wasn't decorative. Maybe that scarf wasn't random. Maybe that quiet woman who lived alone by the sea wasn't just lonely. Maybe she was remembering. Maybe she was once free. Did you ever notice some people just seem to know things? They walk into a room and feel what no one says. They can fix things without reading instructions. They know how to lead without shouting. That's how many female pirates lived. After. Not loudly, not obviously, but deeply. After they were captured. After they were let go. Or simply lost and forgotten. They stepped off the deck and stepped into towns, villages, communities. And slowly, quietly, they became part of things, but different. Like a wave that still pulls long after the tide retreats. Let's visit a small inn, in a port town in Wales. The rooms smell of firewood and old wool. There's a woman who runs it. Her name's Bess. She's in her 50s. Wears boots instead of slippers. Keeps a knife on her apron string. Not for show. Not for threats. Just because. She's the kind of person you don't mess with. But also, the one who brings you a warm towel when you're cold. The one who notices if your hands are shaking. The one who locks the doors at night, from both sides. No one knows where she came from. Not really. But the way she stacks crates, it's how you load a ship. The way she slices meat, quick, sharp, balanced. Like someone who used to do it in storms. She doesn't speak of the past, not even when the fire is low and the guests are snoring. But some nights, she drinks alone in the back kitchen, and stares at the rope above the door. It's not decorative, it's a rigging knot, a signal, only a sailor would know. Further south, in Lisbon, there's a fruit stand run by a woman named Lena. She whistles sea tunes under her breath, counts in 5 languages, never gets cheated, and has a strange tattoo on her wrist, a circle made of waves, and one tiny fish swimming backwards. She says she got it for luck, but old sailors nod quietly when they see it. They know. She once navigated by stars, before she sold apples and figs, before she laughed with children in the shade, before she wore soft skirts instead of wet trousers. Not every female pirate hid. Some didn't need to, because the world around them never noticed them in the first place. There's a woman in Tobago. Her name is Sylvie. She's tall, walks with a slight limp, sells dried herbs in paper packets. No one pays her much mind, but some say she used to deliver messages between ships at night, rowing small boats with no lantern, just moonlight. She was never caught, never named, but when the pirates were crushed, she folded her oars, stepped off the beach, and opened her shop. Now she tells people how to sleep better, what to drink for chest pain, what to burn for bad dreams. She's calm, measured, wise, and if you sit by her stall long enough, she might teach you how to fold a banana leaf the way her old captain did. Let's wander again, to an orchard in southern France. It's quiet here. Rows of trees, buzzing bees, the scent of pears in the sun. A woman works here. Her name is unknown. People just call her the widow. They think she lost her husband to war. Or maybe the sea. Or maybe, something darker. But she works every day. She knows when the fruit is ready. Knows which branch to cut. Which one to leave. And sometimes, she sings. Songs no one's heard. Songs in a language no one recognizes. Songs with rhythm that doesn't match the land. Because it wasn't from here. It was from the water. She once lived aboard a merchant raider. A kind of half-pirate. Stole when needed. Traded when it made sense. She was the quartermaster. Kept inventory. Managed people. Now, she manages pairs. And yet, the same skills apply. Balance. Patience. Instinct. You see, piracy wasn't just about fighting. It was about thinking, surviving, reading the weather, and reading people. These women didn't just disappear after capture. They blended. And in blending, they carried what they knew into the quiet corners of society. No one asked them where they learned it. But they knew things. How to calm a man in panic. How to build a fire in rain. How to pack for a long journey. How to hide things in plain sight. They were often better leaders than the men around them. But they didn't fight for the role. They just waited. And when something went wrong, people turned to them anyway. There's a bakery in the Canary Islands. The woman who runs it. Never married. Never left the shop. But she bakes bread, shaped like ships. Just a little. Just enough for those who notice. And behind the counter, she keeps a book. Not a recipe book. But a log book. She writes in it every day. Like a captain, marking time. Tracking her days. Flour. Yeast. Wind direction. The same way she once tracked tides and sails. Some say, this is a kind of piracy too. To take the world's expectations, and quietly do something else. Without asking. To sail your own way. Without needing a ship anymore. And maybe that's the real secret. What happened to female pirates after capture? They kept going. Just differently. Softly. Smartly. Silently. They became innkeepers, traders, farmers, midwives, brewers. And yet, in their quiet routines, they were still navigating. Still steering. Still watching the stars. Even if no one else noticed. And tonight, you're noticing. You're hearing the stories no one else asked about. You're sitting at their table. You're watching their fingers fold napkins, like sails. And maybe, you're realizing, the pirate never left. She just stopped shouting. And sometimes, that's when people become truly powerful. A calm sea still carries weight. Still moves. Still remembers. So do they. You know, sometimes you don't need to say a word to be understood. It happens with people who've seen the same storms, walked the same roads, stared at the same horizon, for just a little too long.
After capture, after courts, after cells, many of these women were scattered across the map, but every so often, they crossed paths again.
And when they did, they didn't gasp, they didn't cry, they didn't run into each other's arms. They simply noticed, and that was enough. Let's go now to a quiet alley in Bridgetown, Barbados. There's a woman who sells candles there. Her name is Mina, hair pulled back in a dark scarf, hands always smelling of beeswax and lavender. One day, another woman walks by, carries bread, wears plain clothes, but has a mark on her neck, faint, almost faded, a little star just below her ear. Mina looks. The woman looks back, and in that glance, 1,000 miles of ocean pass between them. They say nothing. But the next morning, a piece of fresh bread is left on Mina's step. No note, no words, just bread. Mina lights a lantern that night. A little earlier than usual. Some called it a sisterhood, but not in the way books say. There were no meetings, no rules, no titles, just the knowing. One woman sees another tie her sleeves with 3 knots. One recognizes the way a fish is cleaned, starting at the gills instead of the tail. One hears a song hummed in the market, and suddenly remembers singing that same tune off the coast of Antigua, during a storm, under soaked sails and laughter. It wasn't spoken, because it didn't need to be. Words are for people who haven't lived it. They had. In Havana there was a laundress named Juana. She kept to herself, had a limp from an old knee wound, wrapped it every morning with rum-soaked cloth. One afternoon, a woman came to the riverbank to wash. Younger, faster hands, but same fold, same rhythm, same motion when wringing the fabric out, with the wrist twist only sailors knew. Juana looked up. The woman nodded once. They never exchanged names, but from that day on, they left small things for each other. A scrap of lemon, a spool of thread, a carved shell. No explanations, just small, careful kindness. Sometimes the meetings were shorter, a glance on a ferry, a whispered line in an inn. Like in Marseille, a barmaid named Elvie once walked past a stranger in the hallway. The woman had tar under her fingernails, a limp cloth belt tied sailor style, and the look of someone who counted paces without thinking. As they passed, Elvie said softly, "North by northwest." The woman replied, "Only if the moon's full," and that was that. Two ships passing in fog, but recognizing each other anyway. In Antigua, there was a baker who hid tattoos beneath long sleeves. One day, a customer came in. A woman with a crooked tooth and hands that looked more like they belonged to a rope maker than a seamstress. They didn't say much, but when the baker wrapped her loaf, she slipped in a coin. One side smoothed down, the other engraved with a tiny anchor. The customer looked up. The baker just said, "Bread's on me." No one else noticed. No one else needed to. Sometimes these quiet reunions weren't in person. They were left behind in objects. A pouch sewn with thread from old sailcloth. A letter with no name, but signed only, from one who remembers. A garden stone, turned just so, marking a meeting place that would never be used again. In Jamaica, there was a midwife named Althea. She helped women give birth, calmed their cries, wrapped newborns with gentle hands. But on one shelf in her home, sat a wooden figure, worn smooth, carved like a ship's wheel, hidden behind jars of lavender and dried mint. No one asked. Until one day, a pregnant woman reached for the mint. She stopped, looked at the wheel. Althea watched her. The woman said nothing, but tears filled her eyes. She didn't cry from fear, or from pain, but from recognition. Althea said only one thing, "I see you." That was all. These women, they lived in a world that had tried to erase them, tried to decide who they were, who they should be. But in each other, they remembered, even when they forgot the faces, even when the names blurred. The rhythm of the sea stayed inside them, and when they saw it in someone else, they knew. They formed soft little networks, not by plan, not by design, just by heart. They shared herbs, warned of soldiers, passed on messages without paper, helped each other disappear when needed. All without meetings, all without rules, only a quiet promise. "I know what you were, I know what you still are, and I will not speak of it." That's what they gave each other. And maybe that's more than any court or captain ever gave them. So, what happened to female pirates after capture? They found each other, not always with names, not always with hugs, but in the ways that matter. In the bread left at a door, in the knot tied around a fishnet, in the silent nod passed between market stalls, in the herbal tea left on a windowsill at dusk. And maybe, just maybe, even now, in some corner of a quiet street, two women pass each other. Neither speaks, but both know, and that is enough. The ocean is quiet, but never empty. Neither were they. Have you ever met someone who still hears the sea, even when it's not there? They pause mid-sentence, turn their head slightly, as if listening to a distant tide, but it's quiet, always quiet. That's how many of the captured women lived, long after the sails were gone, long after the chains were taken off, long after the names were forgotten. They lived in still places, but the sea stayed inside them. Let's walk now to a worn-down hut at the edge of an English cliff. There's a woman who lives there. She's never seen in town. She doesn't trade. She doesn't speak much, but the children call her Old Star, because every night, she sits outside her door and looks up. Some say she talks to the sky, others say she's waiting for a ship, but no ships come here, just wind and rain. Inside her home, there's a shelf with jars of sea glass, each one labeled in scratchy letters. Some say, others, Bridgetown. One just says here. She was once caught aboard a merchant raider. She served time, was released quietly, walked north, and never looked back. But she never stopped looking out. The sea isn't just a place, it's a rhythm, and once you've learned it, it stays with you. In a quiet coastal town in Portugal, there's a woman who spends her days combing the shore. She collects driftwood, bones, odd pieces of rope, scraps of sail. She builds them into sculptures, not for sale, not for anyone, just because. They say her name is Elena. that she once navigated a smuggler's ship along hidden routes, that she was captured and set free on condition she never sail again. She agreed, but her hands never stopped moving like the sea, smoothing, tying, balancing. She doesn't speak of her past, but her eyes do, like gray water in fog. And when the tide comes in, she stands ankle deep in the foam and closes her eyes, like the waves are speaking to her, and only her. Another woman lived in a cave on the southern coast of Italy. She wasn't feared, she wasn't loved, she was simply there. Villagers brought her scraps, bread, goat's milk, blankets in winter. In return she told stories, but not full ones, just pieces, images, a boy with silver buttons, a sky that turned green before the storm, a captain who never blinked. She'd speak, then pause, then look out at the water. Sometimes she would whisper, "They're still out there, you know." Not all of them were caught. And then she'd hum a tune, one no one knew, one that made people's skin feel cold, not from fear, just from knowing. You see, not all prisoners stay behind bars. Some carry their prisons inside them. Quiet ones, not made of steel, but of memory. And for many of these women, that prison was the silence of land, the stillness of earth. They had learned to breathe with the sea. Now they breathed differently. One letter, written by a doctor in Charleston, says, "My patient speaks in dreams. She uses words I cannot place. She counts out loud in steps, and sometimes cries when it rains." The patient, a woman in her 60s, no family, no records, but on her ankle, a tattoo. Tiny, barely visible, a shell inside a circle, a sailor's mark, only one given at sea. He didn't know what it meant, but she did, and maybe that was enough. In an inland town in France, miles from the coast, a teacher once gave her class a strange assignment: draw the place you dream of most. The children drew gardens, castles, rainbows, but one girl drew a ship, slightly tilted, flags fraying in the wind, no name. When asked where she saw it, she said, "My grandmother told me stories, but only in winter, only when she thought I was asleep." That girl's grandmother had once been captured aboard a vessel they never named. She served time in a small outpost prison, was released with no belongings. But her mind never released the ocean. She lived landlocked for 40 years. Yet every night, she slept on the floor, with her hands behind her head. Said it felt like a hammock, like the ship was still rocking. Some people move on, others just adapt. These women, they adapted. But inside, they still sailed. They still listened to the breeze for direction, still tracked the sun, still walked in rhythm, as if the deck was beneath them. You could always tell, if you knew what to look for. And now, what does that mean for us? For you? For this quiet moment in the dark? It means some part of their story is still moving. Not loudly, not urgently, but softly. In a name you hear once and feel you've heard before. In a seashell left on a windowsill for no reason. In an old ring, with a carving no one understands. Their stories didn't stop at capture. They never stopped. They just changed shape. From cannon fire to candlelight. From storms to whispers. From sailing ships to drifting thoughts. So tonight, as the world slows down, as your eyes get heavy, know this. There were women who once ruled storms, and then chose silence. Not because they were broken, but because they were full and calm. And maybe you carry a piece of that too. Just like the sea, quiet, endless, and always just out of reach. Funny thing about legends, people think they burn bright, that they live forever, that the ones remembered always go out in fire and song. But the truth is, sometimes the greatest stories go out like a candle near a window. Quiet, flickering, soft. Many of the women who once sailed, who once defied law and storm and death, didn't die with a sword in hand. They lived, and they lived, long. There's something beautiful in that, isn't there? Not just survival, but stillness after chaos. You see, after they were captured, or walked away, or disappeared into quiet streets, many of these women simply kept going. And in time, the world around them forgot. No one remembered who they had been, what they'd done, where they had sailed. They became grandmothers, seamstresses, landladies, healers, ghosts in plain sight. Let's visit a small village tucked between hills and cliffs. Just north of Cadiz, Spain, the kind of place where goats walk the roads, and windows are always open. There, In a house with vines curling up the whitewashed walls, lived a woman named Catalina. Her neighbors knew her as kind, quiet, sharp-eyed, even in her 60s. She always walked to the market with a woven basket, and never needed help carrying it. She had no children, no husband, but she always had visitors, especially young girls. They came to her for stories, not pirate stories, but strange ones. Tales of islands that disappeared, of birds that spoke riddles, of a star that only shone once every 10 years. The children didn't know where those tales came from. But Catalina did. She'd seen those places. Not exactly like the stories, but close enough. She'd once sailed with a merchant crew turned pirate. They plundered French ships, evaded capture twice, and finally surrendered when the sea grew tired of them. Catalina was captured, held briefly, questioned, then released. Too quiet, they said. Too old, they thought. Too small to matter. She moved inland, far from the shore, and for decades, she grew rosemary, taught needlework, and baked soft bread. But her eyes, they still watched the horizon. Every evening she sat by her window, hands still, back straight, watching the sun fall behind the far hills. And in her last days, she whispered something to the local priest. The sea never punished me. It simply sent me home. In New England, a woman named Eliza outlived 3 landlords. She rented a room above a bakery, paid in exact coins. Always the same day, same time. Never late, never early. People said she once kept a drawer filled only with ropes, tied in perfect intricate knots, just for her. When a storm hit the town, she knew it was coming before the sky turned. She warned the fishermen. When a ship's mast broke on a returning trade vessel, she was the one who showed them how to brace it with old timbers. Not even the shipwright knew how. She said nothing about her past, but she had a way of moving that made people step aside. A stillness with weight. No one questioned it. Years later, when she passed, her landlady found only one letter among her things. It had no name, only a sentence. Wind in the west again. You'd like that. These women didn't need statues. They didn't need their names in books. They lived in the after. In the slow, endless days, when the world no longer asked them who they were. And so, they were free again. But differently. Not with sails, but with quiet. In the Canary Islands, a woman named Sabine kept pigeons. She said nothing about her life, only cared for birds, fed them by hand, let them rest on her shoulders. But one day, a traveler passed through. He noticed the way her back door opened with a coded knock. He noticed the markings on her garden stones, sailor signs, carved low. He noticed the birds flew in patterns, not random ones, message routes. He asked if she had ever been a sailor. She smiled and said, "I've never not been." He left her alone after that. Years later, a notebook was found under her floorboards. It contained wind maps, old crew names, a single page with one word, safe. These were the ones who lasted, the ones who didn't burn out, who didn't return to crime, who didn't vanish in violence. They just kept living, through changing seasons, through wrinkled hands and failing knees, through time, and in living so long, they outlasted their stories. You'd never know it to look at them. They wore aprons, not belts, brought soup to neighbors, owned cats, but when they stood near the water, the sea stood still, as if it remembered them, even when no one else did. When someone's lived a life they can't speak about, they often speak in other ways. Not with confessions, not with lectures, but in small things. A habit, a warning, a whisper before sleep. Many of the women who once sailed the sea, who were captured, pardoned, released, or forgotten, still carried what they knew. And eventually, they passed it on. Not loudly, not like legends, just quietly, like giving someone a lantern during a storm. In a dusty village on the edge of the Irish coast, a girl once asked her grandmother how to find true north. The grandmother didn't hesitate. She said, "If the moss is thick on one side of a stone, and the wind smells like copper, turn away from the rising sun." It sounded like nonsense, until the girl grew up, and traveled, and found that her grandmother's strange advice always worked. Only later did she learn. Her grandmother had once been held in the brig of a Spanish warship, released by accident during a trade. She never said what she'd done before that, but she always walked in straight lines, even when the roads curved. In a kitchen on the southern coast of Hispaniola, an older woman stirred a pot of stew. A girl stood beside her. "What's that spice?" she asked. The woman smiled. "Pepper root and dried lime." The girl wrinkled her nose. Who taught you that? The woman leaned close. A cook on a sloop off Port Royal. We stole chickens from a French fort once. The girl giggled. She thought it was a joke. But the woman's eyes didn't blink. And when she served the stew, she muttered something under her breath. It was an old sailor's blessing, one not heard on land for 100 years. These women didn't write history, but they folded it into stories told by firelight. Stories that made little sense, unless you knew where to look. In a quiet port near the Cape Verde Islands, a seamstress once taught her granddaughter how to patch sails. Only they didn't call them sails. They called them dream cloths. Fold from the foot, not the peak, she'd say. Wind moves differently when it sees you. No one knew what that meant, but the girl remembered it. And later, when she became a navigator, she folded her maps the same way. There was an old woman in Marseille who played a game with children in the alley. She'd draw shapes in the dust, circles, crosses, dots. Then she'd say, "Find the treasure." It seemed like nonsense. Just play. Until one boy noticed something. The shapes she drew were maps. Old ones, hidden coves, landing marks, coastal routes from before the war. He copied them into his notebook, and years later, became a cartographer. He never knew her name, only called her Madame Salt. She vanished one winter. But the notebook stayed with him, and her maps still worked. In Trinidad, a grandmother taught her grandson how to listen to silence. She told him, some silences are empty, but others are full. She'd sit with him by the ocean, eyes closed, and say, "Listen for the sails." He thought it was pretend, a game. But when he became a sailor himself, he could sense storms long before others. He didn't know how. Only that, his grandmother had once slept on a ship's deck, with a knife under her pillow. She never said why, just that. Land doesn't teach you everything. Stories weren't always about ships or swords. They were, like the woman in North Africa, who taught young girls to braid their hair, so the wind respects you. No one asked why, but the braids stayed firm, even in hard gusts. She never wore shoes, walked like a sailor, cooked fish the same way every time, whistled only when the moon was out. They thought she was strange, until one girl grew up, left home, sailed once, and realized, the braids held, just like she said. Many of these women didn't call themselves pirates anymore. They didn't call themselves anything. They were just there, older, wiser, sometimes tired, sometimes smiling, but never fully gone, because they had planted something, passed something, a look, a touch, a moment that stayed, like the woman who taught her niece to tie knots so they remember you, or the grandmother who wouldn't sleep unless the room rocked, so she hung her bed from the ceiling. She said, "The sea will find me in my dreams." And maybe it did. Maybe it found them all. Not with waves, not with ships, but in the hearts of people they touched, without ever explaining why. They didn't need monuments. They had daughters, and cousins, and curious children with salt in their hearts. So what happened to the female pirates after capture? They passed on what they knew, quietly, steadily, without names, and maybe some of it still lives inside you. If you know how to listen, in silence. If you know how to read wind, without looking. If you've ever felt drawn to the sea, for no reason at all. Maybe one of them left something just for you. Have you ever walked into a room and felt out of place? Not because anyone said anything, not because anything was wrong, just a quiet sense that the rhythm around you isn't quite your own. That's how it felt for many of the women after the sea, after the sails were folded, after the noise and the danger and the movement stopped. They were back on land, but land never felt the same. And they weren't quite like everyone else anymore. Some of them lived normal lives, or something close to it. They baked bread, sewed clothes, watched children run through dusty streets. But beneath the surface, they lived in two worlds. One foot in the now, one foot in the deep past, still damp with salt. They'd nod politely when spoken to, but their eyes would drift out the window, looking for sails that weren't coming, listening for gulls that weren't there. Let's meet one of them now. Her name was Esme. She ran a boarding house near the docks in Marseille. Clean rooms, good soup, strong rules, no noise after dark, no shoes on the stairs, no questions about past lives. She'd once sailed with a pirate crew disguised as traders. They smuggled spices, jewels, letters no one dared carry by land. She was caught, but never named, paid a fine, vanished for 5 years. then returned, older, quieter, and opened the house. Her guests never suspected. But sometimes, after dinner, when everyone was gone, she'd take out a tin box. Inside, a feather, a compass, a piece of sailcloth with a stitched red X. She'd look at them slowly, not with longing, not with regret, just stillness, like someone touching a mirror in the dark. In Veracruz, a woman named Luz worked in a bell tower. She rang the hour. No one knew where she came from, but she was always early, always exact. She said she liked the sound, that it reminded her of home, but home was not Veracruz, not truly. Her real home had moved. It rocked with the waves. She'd once been navigator on a coastal vessel, marked islands by moonlight, knew how to count the wind. Now she rang bells, but she still listened for storms before they came, still tilted her head toward the horizon before sleeping. The bell's rope was tied in a sailor's knot. No one noticed, but she did. Some of them never spoke of the sea again. It wasn't shame, it wasn't fear, it was protection. They had built new lives, homes with walls, work with meaning, and talking about the old world meant opening a door they'd worked hard to close. So they kept it shut, gently, but firmly. Like the woman in Madeira who raised chickens. Everyone called her Mama Rojo. She wore red scarves, grew red chilies, had a red bird that never left her shoulder. Children said she was magic, but she wasn't. She was once a ship's surgeon, wrapped wounds in motion, used rum as antiseptic, heard confessions as men died. Now she kept hens warm, fed hungry mouths, kissed scraped knees. She never mentioned knives, or blood, or the sea. But her bird only sang when the wind came in from the south. The women who lived in between didn't choose to be half this, half that. It just happened when you've sailed long enough. Faced capture, faced silence. You don't fully return. Not really. You learn to exist quietly, in two shapes, at once. One the world accepts, one that only you know. Some of them married, but never told their husbands where they learned to read charts, or why they could gut a fish with a surgeon's precision, or why they always flinched when someone shouted orders. They laughed, they sang, they lived, but never all the way. And some, they never married, never settled. They wandered, from port to port, town to town. They sold trinkets, healed animals, watched the stars, and people just called them odd, or gifted, or lonely. But really, they were just trying to breathe air that didn't move like the sea used to. Have you ever seen someone standing near water, not moving, just staring, not sad, not dreaming, just there? That was them. You may have passed one in a town you visited, a woman with soft steps, a sharp glance, a way of knowing which way the wind was blowing before the leaves even turned. And if you had asked her, "Were you ever a pirate?" she might have smiled, tilted her head, and said, "Once, but not anymore. Now I just keep the wind company." There's something powerful about staying still. When the world wants you to disappear, you don't shout, you don't fight, you just stay. Breathe, keep going. That's what many of the captured women did. They didn't make noise, but they didn't vanish either. They lived quietly, on their own terms. Let's visit one of them now. Her name was Annika. She lived at the edge of a Dutch village. Small house, one window, always a pot of warm milk on the stove. People thought she was a widow. Some said her husband died at sea. Others whispered she'd never married at all. The truth? She once stood on the deck of a captured merchant ship, sword drawn, chin lifted, coat flapping in wind. She was arrested by a British officer who didn't realize she was a woman. By the time he did, she'd already escaped. She fled inland, changed her name, cut her hair, disappeared. Now she taught girls to read, cooked soup, wrote poems that she never published. But in her cellar, in a box wrapped in cloth, she kept her compass, and a silver ring taken from a Spanish captain's hand. She never wore it, but every now and then, she opened the box, held the ring, closed her eyes. Another woman lived in Morocco. Her name was Zahra. She owned a small lantern shop. No sign, no hours, but always open when needed. Her lanterns were beautiful, not ornate, simple, but they burned steadily, even in strong wind. People asked how she made them. She said, "You have to understand darkness before you make light." What they didn't know, she once lit the lamps below deck on a pirate ship. She'd sneak below after the raids. Patch wounds, whisper soft songs, keep the men calm. She was caught in Algiers, imprisoned for 11 months, then forgotten. She walked away, found a quiet city, and lit a new kind of flame. Now, when storms roll in, her shop glows first. And sometimes, ships leave coins at her door. Just a few, just enough to say, we remember. Quiet resistance isn't loud, it isn't angry. It's planting herbs in soil, where nothing is supposed to grow. It's speaking 3 languages in a town that only wants one. It's keeping your door unlocked, even when you have reasons not to. In Sicily, a woman named Rosa refused to marry, not because she didn't want love, but because she once had freedom, and nothing else felt quite like it. She worked in a vineyard, picked grapes, sang songs no one recognized. Once, someone asked what language she was singing. She just said, "Old sailors talk," and walked away. No one pressed. But every year, on the same night, she poured wine into the dirt, a toast, to someone, to something, maybe even to herself. These women lived long lives, not famous, not loud, but deep. They grew gardens with fences made from ship rope. They taught local children to build toy boats that actually floated. They knew how to sharpen a knife without making sparks, how to watch the stars without needing to speak. They resisted by being present, being calm, being themselves, in a world that wanted them to pretend. In the Scottish Highlands, an old woman kept a journal, small, leather-bound, filled with short entries. Moon full, wind sharp, saw gulls today, 5, no one read it, until after she passed. Then, they found a folded paper at the back, drawn by hand, a map, to nowhere, to everywhere. It had names no one recognized, places the locals had never heard, but the paper smelled like salt, and the ink didn't fade. There's power in quiet. A woman who once fought for gold, now grows chamomile. She sells it wrapped in fabric, not paper, because it breathes better that way. A girl asks why she knows that. The woman shrugs. Sailcloth, same idea. Then she hums a song, slow, without words, and the girl falls asleep right there. Some people change the world loudly. Others just refuse to disappear. The former pirates? They weren't trying to be heroes, or rebels, or symbols. They were just trying to stay themselves, even after capture, even after silence, even after the world said, be small, be quiet, be different. They were quiet, yes, but not small, and never different. They stayed exactly who they were. And somehow, that was the most rebellious thing of all. Some things never really leave you. Not fully. Like a song stuck behind your teeth. Like the feel of motion even after the boat has stopped. Like salt in the air, long after the storm has passed. For many of the captured women, the sea wasn't a chapter that ended. It was something softer, something still alive, just changed shape. They didn't return to piracy. Not in the way books imagine. But some found their way back to the water. And when they did, it wasn't with flags or cannonballs. It was quieter, softer, more human, like a whisper from the tide, saying, I remember you. Let's visit one of them now. Her name was Clara. She lived near the docks in Savannah. Not in a grand house, just a modest cottage with blue shutters and wind chimes made from shells. She ran a ferry, a simple boat, 2 benches, 1 oar. She took people across the inlet each morning, fishermen, schoolboys, old couples with picnic baskets. They never knew who she had been, but she rowed with grace, never missed a beat, knew when the tide was coming before the gulls even flinched. She once sailed with a crew of thieves. They boarded empty ships, took only food, left silver untouched. They believed in surviving, not stealing. They were caught. Clara was spared. Too young, they said. Too small to have mattered. She didn't correct them. Now, decades later, she still moved like water, still sang to herself while rowing, still carried a knife tucked in her boot. Out of habit, not fear. One boy once asked why she always looked at the horizon when they crossed. She smiled. Because sometimes it looks back. In the Azores, a woman named Joanna taught girls how to fish. Not with rods, not with rules, but with rhythm. You watch the shadows, she said, not the surface. She never spoke of where she learned it, but her hands were scarred. Her eyes creased, not from laughter, but from long days facing wind. She kept a ledger, marked with dates and fish weights. But on the last page, there was something strange. A list of ship names, long gone, all crossed out, except one. It simply read, "Still sailing." No one knew what it meant, but Joanna did. You see, returning to the sea didn't mean returning to crime, or danger, or running. It meant returning to self, to salt, to movement, to that deep knowing that you are part of something much bigger, but still held by it. Some women did this by teaching, others by watching. There was a woman in Alexandria who kept a tiny lookout post above her spice shop. She claimed it was for birds, but really, she watched the harbor, every ship, every flag, every captain's face. She never spoke, but every now and then, she would leave a pouch of tea near the boarding planks, only for certain crews, only when the wind blew from the east. People thought she was strange, but those who drank the tea, they said they slept better, dreamed clearer, sailed smoother. In a northern village, a woman known only as Tilda by the shore taught knots to children. Not sailor knots, she said, but memory knots. One for courage, one for direction, one for when you feel lost. The children tied them to their shoes, to their hair, to the branches of trees. Tilda never explained the meanings, but on stormy nights, her house glowed first, her door stayed open, and she never turned anyone away. They say her walls were lined with maps drawn by hand. None were labeled, but all were real. Returning to the sea didn't mean taking, it meant giving. Giving knowledge, giving rest, giving presence. Some women simply walked ashore every day, carried buckets, collected shells, listened. When asked why, they said the sea tells stories no one else can hear. I'm just listening. Others started helping sailors who were sick, or drunk, or broken in the heart. They'd sit beside them, say nothing, just hum, or wrap bandages like they once did below deck. These weren't pirates anymore. They were guardians of memory, of quiet, of kindness, of the old ways no one writes down. In one port, a lighthouse keeper was a woman. She'd once sailed under a name she no longer used. Now she lit the way for others. She never left the tower, cooked alone, wrote in a journal, filled only with weather, and tide. And once a month, she sent a letter to no one, dropped into the ocean with a weight tied to the corner. No address, just ink, just hope. And maybe, just maybe, one of her old sisters at sea would find it, or dream of it, or feel a soft tug at the edge of sleep. So what happened to the women after capture? Some walked away from the sea, but others walked back, not to crime, not to fame, but to rhythm, to salt, to a deep, patient love. They knew the sea could be cruel, but also that it was home, and you never stop loving home, even when it hurt you. So they returned, quietly, steadily, fully. It's strange, isn't it, how a single name can mean so many things. To one person it's just a sound. To another, it's a story. To someone else, a ghost. Tonight we stay with the ones who were remembered, not by books, not by monuments, but by whispers, by small acts, by the way the wind still says their name in certain places, just softly enough to make you pause. These were women who were once pirates, captured, changed, and somehow still, they carried their stories like quiet embers. Let me tell you about Eliza. She lived in a coastal village. She made nets, strong ones woven with rhythm and peace. But Eliza was never just a net maker. She was once the navigator of a pirate ship called the Cold Star. Not many knew about that one. They never fired a single cannon. They stole food, medicine, and oddly blankets. Then they left poems behind in the captain's quarters of the ships they boarded. They were caught one summer evening near the Canary Islands. Most were hanged. Eliza was spared. No one could prove she'd harmed anyone. And her maps, her maps, were so detailed that the Navy quietly copied them. She was given a choice: testify against the others, or live in silence. She chose silence. Years later, in her cottage, she stitched maps into her curtains. Not pirate maps, just memories. Little blue lines for winds. Red knots where storms once found her. Tiny golden circles for the safest harbors. Visitors thought it was decoration, but if you looked close, you'd find the shape of the Cold Star stitched into the lower left corner. She never married. She didn't need to. She had the sea, the wind, and the memory of being wild. There was also Ruth. She worked at a library, barely spoke above a whisper. But if you asked for books about the sea, she'd suddenly wake up. Her fingers danced across the spines. This one has good currents, she'd say. Or, that one smells like rope. No one knew she once smuggled books into coastal towns under the sails of a pirate sloop. Books were forbidden in that region then, and she believed that words were worth stealing. When she was caught, she was imprisoned, but not for long. The town magistrate's daughter fell ill. Ruth knew herbs. She cured her. She was released without charge. She never spoke of the sea again, but sometimes, at closing time, she would hum a slow, strange song with no words, and her fingers would drift along the bookshelf like waves. One young girl once asked what the song meant. Ruth paused, smiled. "It's the sound of forgetting," she said, "and remembering, all at once." Now, there were also those who didn't want to be remembered. They lived in shadows. But the sea never forgets. There was a woman called Noma. She worked in a lighthouse. She kept no visitors, no name on the door, no letters, nothing. But once every month, without fail, a single lantern would appear on her cliffside. No one knew who placed it, or why, but sailors who passed by that night reported calmer seas, clearer skies, less fog. Coincidence? Maybe. But those who asked too many questions never found Noma. She didn't hide, she just faded. And yet, her presence was known. In the way birds flew quieter near her cliff. In the way the wind bent around her home. Like the sea, respected her. Some women grew older, gently, quietly. Their piracy was a soft dream they kept folded in the corners of their minds. They became storytellers, not just of battles or captures, but of smells, sounds, textures. They talked about the smell of tar, the creak of wood under night winds, the feeling of biting into a stolen orange after 3 days of dry biscuits. One woman, Miriam, became a midwife in a little town by the coast. She delivered babies calmly, firmly, gently. She once said, "A birth is like a ship leaving port. You prepare, you wait, and then suddenly it's gone, out into the world." People didn't know she once tied ropes on a pirate rig, but she tied the same knots when wrapping newborns. Strong, secure, with just enough give for growth. She taught others too, not just how to deliver life, but how to trust your own hands. Her tools smelled of lavender and oil. Her home smelled like safety. When she passed, they found a wooden box beneath her floorboards. Inside were old coins, a single torn flag, and a letter. It simply said, "I was not a thief. I was a tide." So what happened to female pirates after capture? Some disappeared, some adapted, some re-emerged, but gentler. But many, so many just became a part of their town's story. Not loudly, not clearly, but softly, like a humming song in the background of life. The sea had changed them, and they let it. They no longer needed sails. They had rhythm. They no longer needed treasure. They had peace. They no longer needed to fight. Because, in the way children tie knots they don't remember learning. They weren't just captured once. They were captured again and again, by memory, by story, by the deep call of the sea itself. And in that quiet surrender, they found something deeper than piracy. They found themselves. Have you ever heard someone say, "She wasn't like the others"? Sometimes it's said with fear, sometimes with admiration, and sometimes with a kind of quiet respect that no one dares explain. That's how it often was, with the women who once sailed, who were captured, and then became legends no one fully believed, and no one fully forgot. They became whispers, half-truths, stories wrapped in the smell of salt and smoke. In a village near the coast of Brittany, there's a story parents tell children on stormy nights. It's not scary, not really. They say, if you ever get lost on the cliffs, look for the woman with the silver braid. She won't speak, but she'll point toward home. They call her the Watcher. No name, no backstory, just the image of her, standing still in the fog. Some say she was once a pirate, who refused to leave the sea, even after capture, even after years. Now she returns only in mist, only to help. And if you try to thank her, she's already gone. No one knows where the story started, but the old fishermen swear they've seen her. Just once, on the edge of the rocks, barefoot. In parts of the Caribbean, there are lullabies passed down by women who claim not to know their origins. Songs about red sails. Songs about golden rings lost to the tide. Songs about storms that only took the wicked. Soft melodies, with words in no known language. Only syllables that taste like sea and smoke. A historian once tried to trace them. couldn't, said they don't match any recorded dialect. But an old woman in Granada just smiled and said, "They're not from land, they're from the sea. And the sea doesn't keep records." In coastal towns, you sometimes hear stories about women who could calm the wind. They don't have names, but they're always the same. A woman who touches the mast, and the storm eases. A woman who speaks to gulls. A woman who walks into the surf at night and leaves no footprints. People say they're made up. Fairy tales, old sailor nonsense. But when a fisherman loses their way, they still leave a piece of bread on the shore, just in case. And in a few towns, they leave a small knife with the handle pointing toward the sea. Not for protection, but for remembrance. In the Scottish Isles, there's a tale of the Red Rope Woman. She appears in dreams, only to women, only when they feel afraid. She ties a knot around their wrist, then disappears. When they wake, they don't remember her face, but they always feel stronger. Some wear red string around their arms, not as fashion, but as quiet armor. They say it's for the rope woman, in case she needs to tie me safe again. No one remembers who first told that tale, but in every version, she smells like salt and orange peel. These stories live not in history books, but in kitchens, in market stalls, in quiet warnings passed from aunt to niece. They're not loud, they don't claim truth, but they hold something heavier than facts. They hold memory, and longing, and belief. Belief that the sea keeps its promises, even if the world does not. And what about the women themselves? The real ones. Some of them heard the stories. Old wrinkled brushing flour from their hands. Hearing children whisper about ghost pirates, or sea witches. And they'd smile, just a little. Not to correct, not to claim, just to remember. They knew the truth, that stories change, but the feeling stays the same. Sometimes, one of them would add a word, a quiet line, a correction. Not to be believed, but to make the story better. Like the baker in a Spanish port, who told children the sea woman with the golden eyes didn't sink, she just swam west. Or the healer in Corsica, who said the storm didn't take the ship, it just turned it invisible. You see, folklore is how the forgotten return. Not with names, but with shapes, with gestures, with wind. So what happened to the female pirates after capture? Well, some became facts, brief entries in dusty ledgers. Captured, tried, disappeared. But others, they became stories, softer than ink, stronger than paper. They lived in warnings, in lullabies, in the way people step more gently near the sea at night. If you ever hear a child say, "There's a lady in the fog who sings when I'm sad," don't tell them it's not real. Maybe she is, maybe she isn't. But someone like her, once was. And the sea remembers. Have you ever heard someone say, "She wasn't like the others"? Sometimes it's said with fear, sometimes with admiration, and sometimes with a kind of quiet respect that no one dares explain. That's how it often was, with the women who once sailed, who were captured, and then became legends no one fully believed, and no one fully forgot. They became whispers, half-truths, stories wrapped in the smell of salt and smoke. In a village near the coast of Brittany, there's a story parents tell children on stormy nights. It's not scary, not really. They say, if you ever get lost on the cliffs, look for the woman with the silver braid. She won't speak, but she'll point toward home. They call her the Watcher. No name, no backstory, just the image of her, standing still in the fog. Some say she was once a pirate, who refused to leave the sea, even after capture, even after years. Now she returns only in mist, only to help. And if you try to thank her, she's already gone. No one knows where the story started, but the old fishermen swear they've seen her, just once, on the edge of the rocks, barefoot. In parts of the Caribbean, there are lullabies passed down by women who claim not to know their origins. Songs about red sails, songs about golden rings lost to the tide, songs about storms that only took the wicked, soft melodies, with words in no known language, only syllables that taste like sea and smoke. A historian once tried to trace them, couldn't, said they don't match any recorded dialect. But an old woman in Granada just smiled and said, "They're not from land, they're from the sea, and the sea doesn't keep records." In coastal towns, you sometimes hear stories about women who could calm the wind. They don't have names, but they're always the same. A woman who touches the mast, and the storm eases. A woman who speaks to gulls, A woman who walks into the surf at night and leaves no footprints. People say they're made up. Fairy tales. Old sailor nonsense. But when a fisherman loses their way, they still leave a piece of bread on the shore, just in case. And in a few towns, they leave a small knife with the handle pointing toward the sea, not for protection, but for remembrance. In the Scottish Isles, there's a tale of the Red Rope Woman. She appears in dreams, only to women, only when they feel afraid. She ties a knot around their wrist, then disappears. When they wake, they don't remember her face, but they always feel stronger. Some wear red string around their arms, not as fashion, but as quiet armor. They say, it's for the rope woman, in case she needs to tie me safe again. No one remembers who first told that tale, but in every version, she smells like salt and orange peel. These stories live not in history books, but in kitchens, in market stalls, in quiet warnings passed from aunt to niece. They're not loud, they don't claim truth, but they hold something heavier than facts. They hold memory, and longing, and belief. Belief that the sea keeps its promises, even if the world does not. And what about the women themselves? The real ones. Some of them heard the stories, old wrinkled, brushing flour from their hands, hearing children whisper about ghost pirates, or sea witches, and they'd smile just a little, not to correct, not to claim, just to remember. They knew the truth, that stories change, but the feeling stays the same. Sometimes one of them would add a word, a quiet line, a correction, not to be believed, but to make the story better. Like the baker in a Spanish port, who told children the sea woman with the golden eyes didn't sink, she just swam west. Or the healer in Corsica, who said the storm didn't take the ship, it just turned it invisible. You see, folklore is how the forgotten return. Not with names, but with shapes, with gestures, with wind. So what happened to the female pirates after capture? Well, some became facts. Brief entries in dusty ledgers. Captured, tried, disappeared. But others, they became stories, softer than ink, stronger than paper. They lived in warnings, in lullabies, in the way people step more gently near the sea at night. If you ever hear a child say, "There's a lady in the fog who sings when I'm sad," don't tell them it's not real. Maybe she is, maybe she isn't, but someone like her once was. And the sea remembers. It's funny, isn't it? How a person can leave a mark on the world, without anyone ever knowing their name. Not with a statue, not with a headline, just a small motion, a little trick, a better way to do something. That's how some of the captured women lived, after the ships, after the courts, after the ocean. They didn't vanish, they flowed into everything, into the cracks, into the trades, into the next generation of makers, thinkers and doers. Let's visit a harbor town in Portugal. There lived a woman named Leonor. She was a cooper, someone who makes barrels. Strong hands, quiet posture, knew the sound of a bad seam just by listening. She taught dozens of apprentices, but none knew where she learned the trade. Because years before, Leonor had been the one who packed casks of food aboard a pirate frigate. She figured out how to seal them better, less rot, longer shelf life. The captain didn't care, the crew never thanked her, but when she was captured and the rest were hanged, the Navy spared her. Why? Because their own barrels were spoiling, and they needed her technique. She never gave them her full method, but when she returned to land, she opened a workshop, and every barrel that rolled out of it held a little of her past, a secret curve here, a tighter hoop there. Small things, but ships sailed better, longer, because of her. In Tunis, a woman named Amira ran a language school, only 3 students at a time, all women, all chosen carefully. She taught Arabic, yes, but also Portuguese, French, Dutch, Creole, and a strange shorthand no one recognized, not even the scholars. It turned out, it was a code, used by smugglers to send secret letters between islands. Amira once delivered those letters. Captured? Yes, but she never gave up the code. Instead, she turned it into poetry. Taught her students how to write with beauty and secrecy. One of her pupils became a translator for merchants. Another, a playwright. Another, no one knows. But Amira's alphabet still exists. In notebooks, carved into stone near the docks, and in the margins of books sold by candlelight. You see, being captured didn't erase them, it just shifted their story. In a village on the southern coast of Ireland, a woman named Bess mended sails. She did it better than anyone else. stitched fast, stitched strong. Sails didn't tear when she touched them. She had one rule: never patch with black thread. When asked why, she'd say, because the sky's already dark enough. No one argued. What they didn't know was that Bess once sewed battle sails under pressure, while cannon fire lit the sky. Captured during a skirmish, she was ignored. They thought she was just the sewing girl. She didn't correct them. After that, she moved inland, then back to the coast. Not to fight, just to keep ships strong. She never sailed again, but dozens of sailors slept safely under the cloth she touched. And even now, when an old sea captain sees a patched sail that holds in high wind, they say, someone like Bess did that. In a dry, quiet town in Mexico, a woman named Lucia ran a small school for girls. She taught arithmetic, but also wind. She had a set of glass bottles on her windowsill, each filled with air, sealed tight. This one, she'd say, was from near Cuba. Feel it. The girls would hold the bottle, feel the faint pressure shift, smell a whisper of salt. She once worked as a wind reader on a pirate crew. It's not a job listed in books, but it was real. She stood at the bow, not to steer, not to shout, but to feel. When the wind changed, she'd tap the mast twice, and the ship would adjust. She never bragged, never told the town who she'd been. But her girls, they learned to read the sky. One became a weather forecaster, another a balloon pilot, one just a mother. But all of them remembered the bottles, the wind, and the woman who taught them to listen. There were many more. A woman who invented a better way to dry rope. One who kept her ship's firestones and lit stoves faster than anyone else. One who smuggled seeds from island to island, growing strange herbs in clay pots with no names. They were captured, yes, but they weren't broken, because their knowledge was woven into cloth, into stone, into language, into lullabies, into the way we tie our shoes, or stir stew. You may not know their names, but you've felt their work. In the sturdiness of a boat, the twist of a knot, the smell of bread that lasts longer than it should. They didn't build empires, they didn't chase crowns, but they endured and passed it all on. So what happened to the female pirates after capture? Some lived quietly, some vanished, some returned to the sea, but some changed the world in 1,000 invisible ways, without asking for credit, without even being seen. They didn't need to be known, they just needed their work to last, and it has. More than anyone realizes. It's strange how some people spend their whole lives chasing more gold, more power, more time, but some, after living a loud, fast life, learn to be still. They don't need to win, they don't need to explain, they just rest. And after capture, after loss, after storms and shackles and silence, some of the women who once lived as pirates simply chose peace. Let's visit a quiet beach on the coast of Sicily. There's a woman who lives in a round white house, paint peeling, vines creeping, wind always whispering around the door. She sells olives, and soap, and sea salt in small jars wrapped with ribbon. No one remembers her real name. They call her Nana Mar, grandmother of the sea. She never talks about her past, but she walks like someone who knows how to shift her weight on a moving deck. She chops wood in 3 precise swings, and once, when a storm shattered a neighbor's fence, she rebuilt it before anyone else arrived. She moves slowly, but surely, and every morning, she stands at the water's edge, just breathing, not looking for ships, not waiting for anyone, just being. Peace didn't mean forgetting, it meant choosing what to carry. Some of the women let go of their names, their crewmates, their rage, but they kept the quiet things. A way of slicing bread, a song hummed during chores, a special way of folding a shirt so it doesn't wrinkle, even in damp air. In a quiet village in West Africa, a woman named Sua grew herbs. She didn't sell them, she gave them to mothers, to sailors, to tired teachers. She used to be the lookout on a fast ship, eyes sharp, voice louder than any man on the crew. She was caught during a raid. She didn't resist. She just sat, waited. They didn't know what to do with her, so they left her in a quiet place. And she stayed. Now, children sit with her in the garden. They ask about pirates. She shakes her head and says, "No, no, no. Pirates were hungry people. I am not hungry anymore. They don't understand. Not yet. But someday, they will." In a gray town built from stone, there's a woman who plays the violin. She plays every evening, same song, soft, slow. She used to tie the lines that held the sails. Now she ties bows on gift boxes. No one knows her past, only her music. But when the wind changes, her melody shifts, just slightly, to match. And the old sailors, they nod, because they remember that sound. It was the same tune played once, on a stolen violin on a moonlit deck, right before a storm. You see, peace doesn't mean forgetting where you've been. It means choosing how you live now. Some women found peace in cooking, like Annette, in Marseille. She ran a small bakery, no sign, no hours. She opened when the bread felt right, closed when the sun got too hot. Her bread was perfect, always warm, always gone by noon. She once told a young boy, "You need dough like you tie a rope. Not too tight, not too loose." He didn't understand, but years later, he became a sailor, and his knots never failed. Annette never left town again. She said the sea had already taken enough, but she always kept one bowl of flour beside the window, just in case someone came knocking, hungry and lost. In quiet corners of the world, these women lived lives like gentle songs, simple, but never small. They didn't need to fight anymore. They had already survived. Peace was not the absence of memory. It was the presence of stillness, of knowing, I could have been many things, but this is enough. Some grew old with others, like Eloise and Morella, two women who shared a home in Portugal. They made jam, wove rugs, argued about weather. No one asked about their past. But the tools in their shed were strange. Rope thicker than usual. Knives curved like waves. A spyglass buried in the garden. Once during a festival, someone asked if they had ever been in love. They looked at each other, laughed softly, and said yes, with the wind, and that was all. So what happened to the women after capture? Some ran, some changed, some whispered back to the sea. But some simply stopped running. They lived slow lives, woke with the sun, slept with the tide, listened more than they spoke. And in their quiet, they found something many never do. Not safety, not fame, but peace. Just peace. Some things fade. Like smoke. Like footprints on a wet dock. Like names whispered once, then never again. But some things stay. They stay even when no one sees them. Even when no one knows why they matter. A knot tied a certain way. A superstition about crossing your boots. A soft whistle that helps you fall asleep. These are not big things. They're small, tiny, but they last. And many of them were left behind by women who once lived wild lives. And then were captured. And then became part of the quiet world. Let's go to a village in the Canary Islands. Every spring, the women of the town wear two colors on the festival day, white and red. No one remembers why. But if you look in the church records, you'll find something odd. 200 years ago, a woman was buried near the sea. Just a stone carved with two colors, white on one side, red on the other. She was a pirate once, captured, exiled. She never spoke again. But she taught 3 girls how to sew, how to read wind, how to listen to a ship's groan and know when a storm was near. Those girls passed it on. And now every spring, the women wear her colors. They don't know her name, but they carry her memory, in fabric, in pattern, in movement. In a cold village on the Norwegian coast, there's a small wooden box in the town hall. No one opens it anymore, but every mayor knows it's there. Inside are bits of old sail, dried herbs, a single gold tooth, and a hand-drawn star map. It was left by a woman named Inga. She came to the town on foot, alone, with a limp and one eye clouded. She never asked for help. She just built a hut near the shore. She taught boys how to fish deeper, taught girls how to row without blisters. She died quietly, left no family. But she left the box and a note. This is not treasure. This is truth. You don't have to understand it. Just keep it safe. They did. And they still do. Legacy doesn't always wear a name. Sometimes it wears a habit. In some places, sailors still tap the railing 3 times before departure. They say it's for luck. But really, it began with a woman who once stood lookout on a stolen brigantine. She tapped 3 times before shouting clear, not for superstition, just for rhythm. But someone copied her. Then someone else. And now, it's a thing people do. No one knows her name, but her rhythm lives on. But her rhythm lives on. In a quiet house in Peru, an old woman writes letters to no one. She seals them in wax, places them in a trunk. Once a year she burns them all. She says, they're not for keeping, they're for clearing. She once wrote letters for an entire pirate crew. Love letters, lies, last goodbyes. They paid her in silence and freedom. She was captured once. The judge asked her name. She smiled and said, which one? He never asked again. Now, her letters are only for herself. She never rereads them, but she always feels lighter after. Sometimes, Legacy is learning how to let go. There's a type of braid worn by women in a small village in Indonesia, tight at the top, loose at the ends. They say it keeps headaches away. But an old story says a woman came to their island once. Tired, wounded, she asked for water. They gave her coconut milk. She stayed for a week. Before she left, she braided a child's hair that way. The girl copied it. Then her sisters did too. Now it's tradition. They don't know her name, but they call that braid style traveler's piece. Do you see? These women, these former pirates, they didn't become legends in loud ways, but in small ones. They didn't teach history, but they left rituals, left sayings, left quiet marks that outlasted ships, kings and storms, like a lullaby without a beginning, or a scent that reminds you of nothing and everything. So what happened to the women after capture? Some faded. Yes, some chose stillness, some chose distance, some chose peace, but some chose to remain, not as people, but as presence. You can feel them in the way the sea smells after rain, in the way old boats creak at night, in the way stories slip into your dreams without asking. They're not names anymore, they're gestures. And if you've ever felt brave for no reason, or careful without fear, or tired in a way that feels like history moving through you, you've met them. They're still here, in pieces, in silence, in legacy. And now, we're here, not at the end of their stories, because stories like theirs don't really end, but at a kind of settling. Like when a ship drops anchor, not because it can't go on, but because the tide says, rest here a while. You've heard a lot. Names with no faces, places with no maps, truths that weren't loud, but lingered. And now maybe, you feel it. That slow, steady feeling. Like drifting, like rocking in calm water, like knowing the past isn't gone, just sleeping under the waves. What happened to the female pirates after capture? Some were punished, some were pardoned, some vanished completely, but many simply changed form. They stopped being pirates, but they didn't stop being themselves. They became gardeners, teachers, spinners of thread, keepers of stories, mothers, sisters, strangers who knew how to tie knots no one else could explain. They didn't wear hats anymore, or carry blades, but in their eyes, you'd still see the horizon, and the sea. It remembers them. When you walk by the shore and the wind shifts, when a wave curls a little higher, for no reason, when gulls circle just once, then leave, that's the sea nodding, saying she was here. They were real. We don't forget. In some places, a cup is left on a windowsill once a year, for no reason. A knife is placed blade down before bed, not for safety, just tradition. In some kitchens, people stir soups, counterclockwise, because someone once said it made storms avoid you. Little things, all from them, from those women, those wild, fierce, gentle, tired women, who chose not to disappear. We don't have their full stories, but we have their shadows, their patterns, their quiet resistance, and sometimes, that's even more powerful, because it means they're not history, they're memory, not frozen, just folded into everything, like salt in dough. You can't see it, but it's what makes it real. Somewhere, there's an old woman, brushing her hair by the sea. She doesn't say much. She waters her plants with boiled rainwater, sings songs with no words, sleeps with a knife under her pillow. Not because she's afraid, but because old habits hold. She once rode the wind, once stood on a deck and shouted commands, once laughed when lightning struck near the mast. Now she smiles when gulls land near her. They never steal her bread, only wait, because they know, she doesn't need a ship anymore. She is a ship now. So if you ever wonder, what happened to them? They became stories told by wind. They became footsteps in sand, that no tide can fully erase. They became the reason a child hums a song she's never heard before. They became part of sleep, not because they were weak, not because they were lost, but because they had sailed far enough. And now, they are calm. And so are you. If you are still awake, then I think you have to see the video from the 17th minute of the story, or play this side video, as maybe it can help you sleep better. Goodbye.